Hi guys, NJ Apostol here from White Paper Games. This tutorial is going to focus on sound waves and sound cues and the difference between them in the UE4 engine. And this may be a very basic topic for a lot of audio guys, but one thing I've noticed as I've tried to broaden my scope of skills by watching other tutorials is that if you don't have a very clear understanding and grip of the basics of some of the elements that people are talking about, when it comes to actually learning something new, it just completely blocks it and gets in the way of the thing that you're learning. So what I wanted to do was do a tutorial for any aspiring sound designers or just sound artists in any way that want to use a game engine, want to learn the basics of it without having to be confused by more advanced tutorials because they haven't learned the basics. So I'm going to breeze through the first few steps of how to import a sound into the engine. So if you need to rewatch this or pause it or anything, feel free to do that. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I obviously don't want to miss it out either, because it is one of the most important things when you open up the engine for the first time. The question is, what do I do? And that's what this tutorial is about. So when you open a new project, this one is just a test scene, just random walls and floors that our artist has put together for me to show you this, and it looks prettier than just a block map. And I've also set up a system that when I hold down the W button, it's going to attach itself to the sound that we're making so that we can hear footsteps. That's something for another tutorial when you're more advanced. But if you want to learn how the cue side of that works and how we make footsteps sound great, this is the tutorial. So when you first open your level, you'll have all of your content in your content browser. Audio will be there by default, and if you double click on audio or just click on it, there'll probably be nothing there at all. So the very basics, these are all things that I've made, and this is what it ends up looking like when it starts to fill up. I've made some character footsteps, I've made drawers and door sounds, music, and even bleeps and bloops, just for random noises, things turning on and off. So if I expand this down, I've also made another little folder called footsteps. Now to make a folder, you literally select the package that you want to be in and click add new. You can also right click in the space and a little drop down menu will appear with add new folder. So all I did was I added new, I gave it a folder name of footsteps, and then when I click on that, this is the contents of it. To create more folders within, add new, create new folder, or right click in the space and create new folder. So what I did is I created subcategories: carpet sounds, tile sounds, and you can go overboard, create wooden sounds and gravel and what have you. This is specifically footsteps, so that's why I've specifically chosen those sounds. Now I've already filled it up as well just to save time, because I don't want to have to keep importing loads and loads of sounds to try and show you how to use them. I'd rather just get straight on with it. But this is how you would import a sound into the engine. You would again either import this time instead of add new, you've just got it right next to it, or right click in the space and import. So it makes it very easy. The drop down menus don't actually show up on this recording software that I'm using, so if I right click, I now can see a big list of things, and import is right here, but I think that's just invisible to you guys. So we'll just have to imagine that for now, sadly, I'm afraid. But if I click import and I go to my sounds on my desktop that I've set up, for example, walking sounds, and I have a group of 16 sounds in there called walking footsteps or walk lever, and just walk, and they're all labeled. When I click import, it just drops them all into this for me, the folder that I've selected to drop them into, and this is the result that we're left with. So don't worry, there's not a huge step to importing. You click import, you decide what it is, and it just puts them all there, and this is how it looks. Okay, so I want to describe the difference between a sound WAV and a cue for you guys. A wave or a WAV is the raw file that you should be importing from your desktop. You might have a piece of music that you want to play, or bird loops in trees. It might be cars outside, which is something else that I have in this scene that I've already set up for you. So the WAV, when you import it, looks like this guy. It's a black box, and obviously the louder the sound and the more you expand it, you can actually see the waveform, but I've got it very small here. And if you don't ever touch that file, it will stay in its rawest form in the engine, and it will sound exactly the same every single time that you play it. If I wanted to edit it, I could double click on it, and let's make sure that you can see the screen. Okay, so if you double click on it, you have a list of properties and a list of things you can do to this sound. So for example, you can make this sound loop by ticking this box. So if it's a piece of music, if I then play it in the world, when it gets to the end of that music, it's going to carry on playing it. If you only want it to play once, you get rid of that. There are a lot of other things you can do here that are just far too advanced to go into, like the subtitling. But in here also are your volume and your pitch. These are two of the most valuable tools you'll ever use. And I'm going to give you a quick example of how to use that. So imagine you have one sound in here and it's a footstep noise. Let's double click at this, click spacebar to play, and that's what the footstep sounds like. So you can edit this WAV by double clicking it and taking a look at the properties, and you can turn the volume down if you want. So let's take it right down. You should still be able to hear that, but it's very quiet. So double click it, we should be able to take the volume right up. Let's have a listen. Okay. The pitch modifier will do exactly that. It will change the pitch, and you can go up or you can go down. But know that when you change the pitch of something, if you change the pitch up, it's going to shorten the length of the sound, and if you drop the pitch down, it's going to elongate the sound, and we're going to end up with something like this. Okay, this is actually a really valuable tool, because a lot of sound designers use this to create new sounds out of sounds that already exist. So you might have, for example, the sound of water running, that if you made it extremely high pitch, it's going to sound like fat frying in a frying pan. And reusing sounds like this is something that sound designers do a lot within games. It's always good if you can reuse assets in games, because it means that you're having to import less of them, which means the memory of the game is a lot less. When it comes to people downloading them, there's a lot less time if you do it across the board. But there's a problem. If I change the pitch of this sound to make it, imagine this is the water I was talking about. If I change this water sound to make it sound like something frying in a pan, then forevermore that sound sounds like something frying in a pan, and if I used it somewhere else for water, it's not going to sound like water anymore. So what we do is we create something called a cue. Now I'm just going to take this back to the way it was. So I think the volume was at 0.75 and the pitch was at 1. So I'm going to save that and take it back to the way it was. So what we do, we right click, and again this drop down menu won't appear, but just know that near the top there's one that says create cue. So I'm going to do that right now, and there's a big menu, invisible one to you guys sadly, but it's right here, and it says create cue. And when I click that, it's done exactly that for us. It's created a cue. Now, the difference between a WAV and a cue is that the cue is what we call an instance of the WAV. So for example, if I make a cue and then make another cue and then make another cue, they're all copies of the WAV. What we can do with those cues, however, is we can change them all. So I can have cue number 1, I can change the pitch and the volume right up so it sounds like this bacon sizzling in a pan, or I can drop the pitch right down and it might sound you can experiment, it could sound like many different things, but regardless of that, both cues would sound completely different. But just because I've changed the instances, the copies of this WAV, the WAV hasn't changed at all. So whereas the WAV that I might have been using sounds the exact same, if I change this, that's the cue, sorry, number 11. So whereas the WAV sounds the same, if I now come and change the cue, drag it up onto this top, this is what it's created, by the way. It's made this sound into this little output. If I now, by clicking the output, I have these same details here. If I now change the details of the cue, you could use that for many, many different things. Even a heartbeat or something like that. You've got to use your imagination when you're doing these things. So if I now change that cue, this is what it sounds like. But if I go all the way back up to the WAV has stayed the same. So, for example, now I can make, if I wanted to, I could make 100 different instances of that WAV in different cues. I could change them all drastically, and I could have 100 different sounds, or 100 different versions of that sound. But I haven't actually edited the raw file, so the sound in the engine stays the same, the memory stays the same, and now I get a load of different tools, and I've actually used the same amount of memory, or very close to. Okay, next up, how to put multiple WAVs into a cue and affect them and make them do some crazy things. Okay. I'm going to delete the cue that I just made because I have one set up ready to go, and it's set up so that when I press W, we're going to hear the effect of whatever we choose to do. So that cue that I've just made, quickly just go over it again. I right click on the WAV, create a cue, and this is the example. This is what we're given. Now what I've done is, in this cue, I've actually deleted the first little node that it gave us because I want to show you how to use multiple ones. So I want to put every single walk sound that I made into this cue. So I'm going to select all of them at once, not the walk leather ones, just the walk ones for now. Don't worry about the reverse ordering of some of these, it's just something that happens within the engine. It makes no difference whatsoever to the result. Now that I have all of those selected, I'm going to right click in the just a blank space of the cue here, and it gives me all of the options that I need. Now if I wanted to, I could just select any one of these nodes and drag and drop them into the world. But seeing as I have loads of different WAVs selected, it's also given me multiple options. So I can, if I want to, I can add a mixer multiple. I can add a random multiple. And that's what I'm going to choose, and I'm going to explain it more in a second after I've done it, but I want to keep this interesting for now, so we'll just do it. So every single sound that I had selected, it's already joined them all up for me with wires as well as a random node. And all of these things here are called nodes. And if you want to play any one of them at any time isolated, you can just click the play node sound. If ever you click play cue, it'll play everything that you're doing. Okay, next part of the tutorial. This is very, very basic, but if you don't know it, you don't know it. You have to connect your sounds up to the output. If you don't, it's literally a broken wire, and you're saying I have a load of sounds and I have an output, but they're not talking to each other. To do that, you simply drag from the output there to the output. Now this creates a line and talks to the output and says, these sounds, that's what I want to play through here. Now, if I had one sound just going straight to the output and I clicked play, it would play just that one sound. But we don't have that. We have 16 different sounds, all going into a random node going into the output. So what that's going to do is it's going to mean that whenever I play this cue, it's going to select randomly one of the 16 sounds. So play will select a sound randomly and output it, and let's have a listen to that. I'll keep clicking so we can give an example. And there you go. If I click it faster, that's just the speed that I'm clicking at. And now you start to feel as if there's an actual walk cycle happening because it's so random that you can't notice a pattern. It's really important to note that when you are making things that are rhythmic, that you want to make sound random, if you can hear the pattern, that starts to break the illusion. So that's why we have things like a random node. It also means that 16 sounds could end up sounding like 100 over a long period of time, because it's so long since you heard number 1 compared to 16 that you've forgotten the exact way it sounds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and, still going quickly, I'm going to show you the effect that this is now creating in the actual the level, the little test scene that we've got going. When I press W, it's going to take one of these sounds at random and play it. So let's do that. Let's press play, and I'm going to press W, and you can hear it plays a footstep. If I press it again, it's going to play a different one, a random one. Okay, and that's perfectly good. We now have random footsteps playing every time I press W. The problem here is that in games people don't just press W, they hold it down. So all I've told it to do so far is make a sound when I press W. So if I hold it down, it's not going to work. This is what's going to happen. Pressed it again. If I press it again, okay, press it again. So we've now got silence. So for this specific example, what I would like to do is I would like to tell my sounds to carry on playing, to loop infinitely until I release. Now I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of how to create a walking cycle in Blueprints. That's for a more advanced tutorial. But what I want to show you is the power that we can utilize in a cue to make what we already have sound great. So I want these sounds to randomly play and loop to the output. So between here somewhere, I need to ask it to loop, and it's as simple as right-clicking, and with all of your options here, there'll be one that says looping, okay, which we have here. Click it, and it creates this little node for us. Another way to do it is if you right-click and you can't find it for any reason, just start to type in the name and it'll bring it up. Click it and it drops it in. So if we link up the looping node, by the way, linking these wires, although this is something that's very, very basic, it's important to know that if you hold down Alt over the pin and click, you can break any of the wires. You may have to do that if you make a mistake, and if you don't know it, you don't know, and it can be frustrating. So that's how we do it. Now what's going to happen if I press this cue is it's not just going to play one sound, it's going to choose one sound, then loop and choose another, then loop and choose another, and so on and so on. And what we're going to end up with is something like this. Okay. Now they sound very, very fast, and the reason they do that is because it waits for one of the sounds to finish and then immediately fires another, waits for that one to finish and immediately fires another. And if we walk around the world, it's going to sound something like this, which isn't fantastic. We have them all firing in a loop now, and when I let go, obviously it stops, but it doesn't sound realistic. It sounds awful to me, if I'm honest. So what we want to do is we want to say that between those sounds playing, we want a little bit of a delay. So we're going to create a gap between them. And we're going to do that again by clicking in the empty space, right-clicking. And again, it's going to be right down here, and I drop down. The drop-down menu is tiny. There are a lot of tools, but they're all very specific to what we can do. So we're going to click a delay, and we're going to put that between the random and the looping. Don't put them the other way around because it won't work. It will start the loop and it will delay the effect of the loop, but keep on looping the same way. I want it to randomly delay before each one. If you don't understand that, you just have to trust me that it works. And now what we're going to do is, because we've put a delay there, we need to tell the delay how long it needs to delay for. If at any point you click on one of these nodes, you have full control over its properties over in the left hand side here in the details panel. So for example, I've got my delay selected and I have my delay ones. If I click random, I can even change all of the different things between the randoms. How random are they? The weighting of how they play. There's a button clicked here called randomize without repeat, so it means it will never play the same one twice in a row, and these are really, really valuable tools. But for now, we're talking about the delay, so let's set a delay. I want to perhaps put about 0.2 of a second between each sound. So I click on the minimum and put 0.2, click on the maximum and put 0.2. Now, as long as these minimum and maximums are both the same, it's always going to be exactly 0.2 of a second in between each sound. If, for example, I set this at 0.1 and this at 0.7, then every time it plays, it's going to choose one. It's going to say maybe 0.5 or maybe 0.6 or maybe 0.2, and it's going to create a random system all on its own. And that's really great for some sounds. But for footsteps, we want them to sound more sequenced because a footstep has a rhythm to it, has a pattern to it. So we're going to set that rhythm, and it's 0.2 seconds. Let's have a listen. Okay, it's already a lot better. Let's take it, make sure we click on it again. Let's take it maybe to 0.3 of a second. It should slow it down a little, and hear how that sounds. Okay, I like that. So that's good enough for this example. Save what we've done. Always save your work. I stopped it there as well. If you don't stop it, it'll just keep on looping. And now let's test that out around the world and hear how it sounds. Okay, a lot better. Okay. So we now have some quite believable footsteps. I say quite believable because there are still a couple of things we can do to make them even more believable. And we'll move on to that now, actually. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add another set of sounds to play with these sounds. Before I do that, I'll quickly recap what we've done, just so that you have a complete understanding of it. I have taken 16 WAVs and dragged and dropped them into my cue that I've made. I've asked those WAVs to play randomly by right-clicking and selecting random. Okay? And if you want to do it this way, you can just create and create and create and create and have as many sounds as you like. From that random node, I've asked it to delay how long it is between each sound, and I've asked for 0.3 of a second, which is not much, but it makes a big difference. And then I've taken this whole thing, and I've asked it to loop by plugging a looping node. And again, right-clicked, and I found looping, and I plugged it in, and that's how we went. So that's how we've got this whole system to go. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to take this little system and add another one to this line of what we're going to do. Okay, so what we have here is the walk sounds, the walk WAVs that I've put into this cue, and below it you might have already seen that I have sounds called walk leather, and there are 16 of those too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add those to the cue that we've already made. Now, it's the exact same method of doing it. You select them, just hold down Control, click them all, and then go into our queue, and in empty space, you can, by the way, you can use your scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out if you need to find more space. What we can do is the exact same way as we made this setup. Right click and random multiple. If you want to just select a random, you can, but if you just select a random, then you're going to have to plug them all in yourself. Selecting random multiple does all the work for you, and you end up with this. So now we have, I'll zoom in so you can see the names a little bit easier. We have all of our walk sounds, and then these are all of they're basically leather creaks. I found a really nice boot that had a great sound to it, so I tried to isolate the actual heel and toe sound, which is these guys here, and then the actual leather creaking itself, because it sounded really nice. I didn't want to leave it out of the sound of the boot because it was something that I thought gave it its characteristic. But what I did do is I isolated all of the leather sounds so that you can't hear the shoe in it. So if I break the link here by holding Alt and clicking the pin and plug in these leather sounds, this is what you're going to hear. Okay. So on their own, they sound a bit like squelching, walking in snow, or squelching sounds of a foot. So what we're going to do is we're going to add them to these sounds, so that they both play, so that when it picks a walk sound, it's also going to pick a leather sound, and it's going to combine them together. But as you've noticed, they're both plugged into random nodes, so it's going to do that randomly. So you'll never hear, well, the chances of you hearing are very slim, the same leather sound over the same leather boot. It's going to keep choosing one or the other randomly, and create a really, really unique sound. But the problem is, if I plug this guy in here, it deletes that line. And if I plug this guy in here, it deletes that line. So what we need to ask it to do is we need to ask it to mix both of those sounds together. So again, same methodology the entire way through this. You right click, I'm just making some space, don't worry about those. You right click, and we're going to ask it to mix them together. So if we ask for, there we go, a mixer. And if I delete that from there, it was just down in here anyway. They're very easy to find, but we have one called mixer. So we can see we have two inputs and one output. There is always one output because there is only ever one here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, from this random node, come into our mixer. Let's delete this link to save confusion. And then we're going to say, from this random node, go into the mixer. And it's literally going to do that. It's going to mix a sound at a time together. And now from this output, we complete the line through the delay, through the looping that we made earlier on into the output. And this is what it's going to sound like. Okay, let's have a listen to it in the world very quickly. Always save your work. I've saved that package, so that's fine. Let's have a look in the world. So we can hear those boots squeaking nice and loudly. Now, although that's in there and it sounds good, it could sound a hell of a lot more realistic if maybe we could just turn down that boot scratchy, like leathery sound creaking, because in reality it wouldn't be that loud compared to the shoe sound. But when you're an audio designer, you're always trying to get the best volume, the biggest volume you can, because it's very easy to turn a sound down. It's not always so easy to turn a sound up. So that's why it's very loud. So what we're going to do is go into our queue, and if we click on the mixing node, we have a load of options. Just like we had on the delay, we had the option to put the delay time in there. On the mixer, we have the option of the volume. Let's Make that so it's a little easier to see. The volume of channel 0 and channel 1. Now, it's probably easier to think channel 1 and channel 2, but in the engine it always starts with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is 0 and this is 1. Basically top, bottom, 1, 2, 3. So we're going to leave the boot sound, which is the top one, the way it is, and we're going to take the leather sound, which is the bottom one here, and we're going to drop it down in volume. And we can either do that by clicking into the space and putting a figure in ourselves, or we can use this this bar here and just slide in and give it whatever value we want. You can go into point something that way, and you can have a hell of a lot of control. For now, we'll just call it 0.4 of what it was, and then let's have a listen to that. Okay, got pretty lucky with that number actually. That's probably just from experience, but that now has taken the leather sound so far down in the mix that it sounds a lot more believable. And if we go into our world and play, hopefully we shouldn't be thinking about that sound so much. I mean, we are from the point of view that we're mixing it, but it's not so much over the top now that it's just in our faces. However, the actual footstep sound itself still feels a little bit obnoxious to me when I'm walking around. It's like, listen to me, this is the biggest sound. And if it was going to be believable, what we'd have to do is turn the whole thing down. So this is our footstep system now. We've got a random 16 footsteps playing over a random 16 leathers, which I think, if my math is right, it's about 254, 256 variations before it should repeat. So that's a hell of a lot of footsteps. They sound really nice, and to just complement the effort we've put into these those footsteps, they need to be the right volume. So by clicking the output, which is always an output volume, think of it as a master volume on a mixer. By clicking that, we get the options here to change the volume, to change the pitch, as we spoke about before. So what I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to drag the volume right down, click play. Okay, you can take it above 0.75 if you want, to really hear all of the details. But it's a footstep. It needs to be present, because it's going to describe the shape of the room sound-wise. It's going to tell you the weight of your character. It's going to tell you the stride of your character. It's going to describe a lot of things to the player. And if it's the simplest thing, like it being too loud, you can really break that illusion. So we drag the volume down and we get it till we roughly like it. Okay, and it's you can bear in mind at this point that because we turned the leather sound down, we might not be able to hear it as well. I actually like it where it is, and that's probably where I'd leave it, but for the sake of this I'm going to take it up just a little bit more, just so we can hear it a bit more for this example. So let's walk around the world now and hear that hear the adjustment we've made. Okay. I still think, actually that hasn't updated, so the reason for that being, I'm going to explain this to you now, but it isn't something, let me just stop that, isn't something that this tutorial is going to focus on. I actually have the sound node in the level, and in the level I have control over its volume, and that is overriding the sound cue. Because I can put multiple of these in the world of one sound cue, they have to override the sound cue. So I'm going to adjust it just the same way in here. You shouldn't have to do this unless you are using the exact same system as me, but I think we got it down to about 35 or something, and it sounded good. And let's have a listen. By the way, it will update everything else in the cue other than the volume and the pitch. They're the only two things that are exposed here that I can change, so they're the only two things that aren't updating. Let's play. There we go. And I also have a traffic noise outside, by the way. That's what you can hear. It's not traffic in the office where I'm working, it's actually in the level, just for ambience. And if I wanted to turn that off so I can hear this a little better, let's just deactivate. I think there's one around the corner as well, and that's what we're hearing. This is the guy. So let's deactivate it. Okay, back to the test scene. So, footsteps. Very nice to listen to. And we have the leather sound in there as well. And let's just open the door. There we go. Right, I actually think the footsteps can go up a little. So again, if I'm in the queue, I would adjust the volume here, or on the output, sorry. But what we've already just talked about is that I need to do it here just for this example. So I'm going to turn the volume up ever so slightly here, just so that we can still have a nice of realism, just to really prove the power of a cue and the different things that you can do. Remember, all I've done is set up that when I'm walking, when I'm pressing W and holding it, I'm walking. Everything else is being done through the cue. It's being told to play randomly. It's being told to mix the two sounds, to put the delay of the time between them, and even loop them. So everything here is being done through the cue, and I'm going to add one extra layer to that now. Okay, so what I've done is I've added one last package of sounds, and they're called floor creaks. And you'll notice this on a wooden floor, and nothing makes... it's one thing to put some footstep sounds in a game. It's another thing to mix them together to the degree that they sound unique as they're actually playing through each other. But it's a completely other thing again to say, what is the surface that I'm on, and what are the individual characteristics that that surface could have. And for a wooden floor, luckily we've got a lot of characteristics in the sound of the tone of the wood, which is more or less there through the footsteps, but also the fact that wood can bend and creak and bow. And all of those little nuances in the sound will add to the believability of a really great footstep sound. And you don't always have to add those to the actual floor. It's possible to select specific areas on the floor in the game world and say, I want to have this specific line of floorboard is going to creak every time I stand on it. Or this corner of the room is particularly creepy, creaky, could be creepy too. If you're making a game where you need to try and sell the idea that that floor is weak and maybe it could be destroyed, it's a really good way of doing it. But if you're not doing that kind of thing and you still want to get those nuances and all those little tiny details in, you can put them in the cue so that as we walk around, we're going to hear these creaks. So again, I've imported them in. They're already all selected by the looks of things because they've only just imported. They do, however, need saving. That's what the star means. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in some empty space, the exact same method, right-click, multiple, and here we have all of our random floor creaks. So, what do we need to do? We need to tell the cue to mix all three sounds together now. Now we don't need, although you could put a mixer into a mixer, that's just a bit hacky and we're not going to do that. All you have to do is go to the mixer that pre-exists and add an input, and now we have three inputs. So let's just check I haven't overwritten anything. So the volume is still the same as it was from before, but now because we have this extra little guy here, we have this one here too. And we're going to take these floor creaks, we're going to add those into the mixer. I'm going to show you how they sound individually so that you know what you're mixing, because I always think it's a little unfair just to add something to the mix without people knowing what it is fully. So this is the sound that we have, and again it's firing through the exact same loop. It's going to have a delay and it's going to loop. So very, very quiet. a very intimate sound, so let's turn it up a little. There you go, just splintering wood under the feet, or wood bending and buckling. So if we plug back in, make sure they go into the same ones because we've already adjusted the volume. If we plug back in the leather sounds, and we plug back in the walking sounds, now, again, I don't want to patronize anybody, but I like going through the chain here just to understand it for people who've never done it before. We are going to randomly select one of each 3 sounds, and then through these randoms we're going to mix them together, and then we're going to add a delay between how quickly they can move, and then we're going to loop the entire thing and tell it to play. And that's what the system is doing, because at this point it starts to look more complicated, but really it's just this one system and you've just done it 3 times. Let's hear what they sound like together. Okay, I quite like the volume of the creaks in there, but let's have a listen to it when we can actually see our scene and see how believable it is. Let's try it in a slightly larger room that I've reverbed. More street sounds. Okay, so I like that a lot, but it sounds, the floor looks very nice, but it sounds like it's a slightly older floor that's really creaky. So I'm going to take it to one little extra point of realism, and I'm going to tell these creaks that I don't want them to play every single time. That I still want it to pick randomly, but I don't always want it to pick a creak, because I don't want every single footstep that I have to have a creak under it. I just don't think it's realistic to do it that way. So a very, very easy method of doing this is to add a load of blank inputs. And think of this as a percentage. So if I had 100 sounds and I had 100 pins to plug them into, every single time I did it, it would choose one of the 100 sounds. If I had 100 pins to plug into and only one sound, then every time it asks for one, the chance of it actually firing off is 1%. If I had 10 plugged into the 100, the chance of it firing off is 10%. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a load of pins, maybe even equal to the amount that's there almost, and we're going to kind of say that it's almost 50% whether it's going to play or not, because we don't want it to play all the time. So we're going to break the link by holding Alt, and I like to do it this way because I know how these things fire off, and it's just a little bit more even if I just drag them to every other one, because sometimes they do tend to fire a lot off the same end and then switch ends. That could just be me making that up, but it's certainly the way I've perceived it to be in the past. So what we're going to have now is, and if you want to keep 2 random empty ones next to each other, you can, or if you want, you can right click and delete the input and even it up. So now we basically almost have a 50-50% chance that this sound is going to fire off. And save it. Now if I play, okay, so that is already a lot more believable. Again, the last thing I think I would do is I would just turn them down a little, because that's personal preference. I want them to, and I always use this word, but what I want them to do is I want them to flavour the footsteps with those subtle nuances that make it feel more real, as opposed to be the forefront of the sound that we're trying to create. And this is what we're left with. And there you go. And that is the power of a sound cue for trying to make a believable walk cycle. I'm just going to turn on these traffic sounds, which is literally I stood outside with a dictaphone and I recorded the traffic, and then I put them around the world. And that's another tutorial again of how to place sounds in the world. Another very, very basic one that needs to be known, but I'll do that separately. Until you know how to use a sound cue or a WAV, there's probably not very much point whatsoever in teaching people how to put them in. But until then, I will leave you with just a little bit more time, me walking around this world, so you can hear the result of this very complicated looking sound cue, but in reality, very simple system to make very nice footsteps. Thank you very much for watching.